You know, it's no secret that turning a school bus into a home on wheels requires a lot of modifications. I mean, just look at everything we've done to this rig, and we're not even finished. But those mods don't stop when you leave the interior. We've got to make sure that the drivetrain, the chassis of the vehicle, is going to be up for the task at hand. And as you can imagine, life as a skoolie looks a lot different than when this bus was driving around picking up kids. Most school buses are set up for a lower top speed. They're not set up to be going for hours and hours at interstate speeds, certainly. And that's exactly what we want to be doing with this. So how can we change the way this bus handles and drives to optimize it for that? Well, in today's video, I'm going to show you my favorite method to do that, which is by swapping the rear end gears to a lower ratio. A lot of buses are designed for a top speed of 55 miles an hour, and they simply can't go any faster because that's the limit of the engine. By changing to a lower ratio rear end, we're going to get more revolutions of the tire per revolution of the engine, which means we'll be going down the road faster. And at a given road speed, we'll be burning less fuel because the engine won't be spinning as fast. It'll be quieter inside, and we'll now have the ability to keep up with interstate traffic and maybe even pass vehicles. What a concept. Don't go anywhere. It's going to be a great video. I've got a lot to share with you. Stick around. Before we get too far into this, I want to take a moment and educate you about differentials, what they are, what they do, why we should care about them, and why I'm changing mine. The differential in a vehicle serves two important functions. First and foremost, it takes power coming in from the drive shaft and distributes it out to each of the wheels on that axle. Because those wheels in a corner will take different paths, they will travel different distances. The wheel on the outside travels a farther path than the wheel on the inside, which means they're going to be rotating at different speeds. That causes a problem if you want both of those wheels to be connected to the power coming to them from the engine. So how do we mechanically link those wheels to the power coming in and still allow them to rotate at different speeds? Well, we use a device called a differential, which does just that. It takes power coming in and distributes it to each wheel while allowing each wheel to rotate at different speeds as needed while still receiving power. Pretty clever, pretty amazing, and I know it's hard to understand how that works, but there's a lot of great videos out there. I might even link one that explain it and give great visualizations. That's an important part of what a differential does, but it's not what we're most concerned with today. What we are most concerned with is the second function of a differential, which is to provide the final gear reduction of the power coming in from the engine and transmission before it goes to the wheels. Let's take a look at how that works. We're going to try to keep things simple, so we'll use nice big numbers, even numbers, great numbers, and we'll work our way through a hypothetical situation. Let's say our engine is turning at 2,000 RPM, revolutions per minute. That engine is going through our transmission, and let's say, like in my transmission, we're going down the highway in drive, and the transmission is shifted through all the gears, and we're cruising along in fourth gear, which is the top gear on that transmission, the one that's in my bus. In fourth, the ratio there is 1:1. That's fantastic, makes our math easy. So we know that our drive shaft coming out of the transmission is now turning at 2,000 revolutions per minute. The ratio of the differential in my bus that it came with stock was 4.44 to 1. That means that the drive shaft would rotate 4.44 times for every single rotation of the wheel. That means if the engine's going 2,000 RPM and the transmission is in fourth gear, we're getting about 450 revolutions per minute of the wheel. And another way to think of that is the speed that that gives us. And we'll say that that speed in my bus was 50 miles per hour. Now, we want to go faster. So how do we accomplish that? We put in a lower ratio differential so that when it receives the 2,000 RPM coming from the engine and transmission on the drive shaft, we're now getting 536 revolutions per minute instead of a mere 450. And that is going to get us about a 20% increase in our speed. So now we're going 60 miles per hour. Pretty cool, huh? And what that means for us is not only are we going to get a higher top speed from our engine, because keep in mind, the engines can only turn so fast, but that's also going to mean that when we're going 60 miles an hour at 2,000 RPM, the RPMs are going to be lower than they would be if we were trying to go 60 miles per hour with our old gear set. Because the engine RPM are lower, the engine's going to be running more efficiently, and it's going to be running more quietly. Two really nice kind of bonuses to this whole project. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to accomplish is not really significantly raising my top speed, although that will certainly happen. I'm trying to make it so when I'm going 60 or 65 miles per hour, my engine RPM, instead of being 2,600, will be more in the 2,100 RPM range. It's going to be quieter, more fuel efficient, all the things I just mentioned. So that's a quick overview of what a differential is, what these ratios mean, and why I'm going to all this trouble to change this one. It's not uncommon for a lot of buses to have differentials that are nearing the end of their life already as they leave service from the school district that they were in. That was true on my bus, and I could hear the gears in the differential making a lot of whining noise, so I knew it was time to consider replacing them. And since I want to achieve, this improved cruising performance, it's a great time to go ahead and move to one with a different ratio, and that's exactly what I'll be doing. Now, this job isn't the most difficult job in the world, but it is a big job. The differential weighs several hundred pounds and is a real bear to move in and maneuver with on your own. And so for that reason, I'm calling in some backup. I've got a friend named Robin who has been our shop mechanic, for about 12 years since I used to run a party bus company, way back in the day. And he's going to come down and lend me a hand. And my buddy Alex, who you may or may not have heard of before, is going to be joining me, and we're going to get cranking on this differential together. It's going to be big, it's going to be heavy, it's going to be messy, but it's going to be worth it. All right, in case you're unfamiliar with what a differential is and what it looks like, there you can see that red one is my differential, and we've got the drive shaft coming in off the transmission, and then it bolts to that universal joint there, which then enters the front of the differential. The differential sits inside the axle housing, which is the big thing that everything's bolted to and carries the weight of the bus. Let's talk about what the procedure for changing this rear differential is going to look like, kind of an overview of the operation. First thing we have to do, the differential is full of gear oil. That's obviously how it stays lubricated. There is a drain plug on the bottom, and we will be pulling that drain plug and draining the fluid. It's also a good idea to go ahead and make sure you can loosen the fill plug, which is on the back side about halfway up, because, we're going to need to put fluid back in when we're all done. Once the fluid is drained, we're going to be removing the drive shaft from the input of the differential. In our case, there is a thing called a yoke there, which the universal joint attaches to, and there are caps that hold that universal joint in place. We're going to remove the small bolts that hold those caps on, and then we'll be able to take the drive shaft and we're going to hang it up, strap it up to the bottom of the frame of the bus out of the way. After that, around the perimeter of the differential on this flange, there are about 14 large bolts. Those bolts hold the differential in place. The differential is essentially just the whole front cover of the axle housing. So we will remove all of those bolts, and then the last step that we have to do before we pull the differential out is at the end here in the hubs of the wheels, there is another flange that has about 10 bolts around it. That hub is actually the end of the axle shaft that spins. That's what turns the wheels, and that shaft goes through the axle housing tube, and it slides into a splined hole on the side of the differential. So that's what it goes into, and when the diff spins, it turns that axle shaft. So we will go ahead and unbolt these, and we're going to pull that axle shaft out so that it disengages from the diff. At that point, the differential is free, and we're going to come in with a jack, a transmission jack, boop, 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 and we're going to jack on the side of that and break that out of the case, slide it out, roll the new one back in, put it into place. We're going to be reapplying new gasket around the flange of the differential, and we'll also be putting in some new gasket around our axle shaft housings here. Bolt it all back together, reconnect the drive shaft, fill it with new fluid, and we should be good to go. Well, we're about to get busy, so that means before we get started, we've got to go over the tools and materials you'll need that we'll be using in case you want to tackle this job on your own. And that starts, of course, with the new gear set. This is actually my old gear set, But you want to go out there and find yourself a gear set that fits your axle. And to find out what axle you have, you might even be able to just look at the data plate at the front of your bus and it'll say what model it is. Otherwise, you can go back there and usually there's a tag. It'll say like a Spicer. For me, mine's a Spicer N175. Super common axle. Pretty much all international buses use that for their rear end axle. And if none of those methods work, you can always try giving your VIN number to the dealer of the company that makes your bus. So I could have called International and given my VIN number to them, and they would have told me my axle number and any specs I needed to know on it. So once you have that axle number, you can start looking for your diff. I got mine off a website called vanderhags.com, and they are a heavy-duty truck equipment parts trading website. And you can get a used gear set for as cheap as 500 bucks, and then they offer remanufactured gear sets for a little over 2,000. I was able to score this one through some stroke of luck for 1,000 bucks from a company called LKQ, and they sold it to me for 1,000 bucks, and it's been remanufactured, so it's got new gears and new bearings. I got really lucky. I hope you get lucky too. The used gears can be a bit of a crapshoot, and if you take this to a shop, they're going to charge you an arm and a leg to do it. We've had people pay north of $5,000 for this job. So once you've got your gears picked out, you're going to want to make sure that you have the gaskets and seals you need, because most of what we're doing is resealing the axle once we remove what's been in there. So for me, I picked up, these are axle seals for the axle half shafts that we remove out of each hub. These seal that. If you don't use these or can't find these, you can use the ultra black or whatever type of oil resistant silicone gasket maker you want to use. And this is actually also what we use around the mating flange of the differential where it seals onto the axle housing. You're going to want to pick up at least 2 tubes of this if you're going to be doing this job. While you're at it, if your rebuilt axle came with a new seal, you're going to be fine. But if you need to replace the seal for the pinion where the yoke slides on, you'll want to make sure that you pick up a new seal while you're at it, because now is the time to change that. The last material that you're going to have is new gear oil. The gear oil that I'm using today is Lucas oil. It's a synthetic oil. It's 75W90. That's a really standard weight for these types of differentials. And I like the synthetic stuff. It holds up better under high temperature. And you know, I don't plan on really ever having to change this fluid very often, so I don't mind spending the extra money there. As far as tooling goes, this little pump for pumping the fluid out of the big bucket into your differential is priceless, because you actually can't just pour it in, for obvious reasons. For us, because we have to take the yoke off of the old differential and slide on the new one, we have to remove this bolt, or we have to remove this nut right here that holds the yoke onto the output of the pinion. And so that was a 55mm nut, and you'll need a 55mm socket. That's just for my axle. Yours will probably have something like that though, so be prepared to go out and purchase one of these large sockets. And we also, because we have to drop the drive shaft when we disconnect it from the diff, we needed a 3/8 inch 12-point wrench, which is a little uncommon. A lot of people don't necessarily have 12-point wrenches, but those were the only specialty tools we needed aside from a transmission jack. And we use the transmission jack to lift this up into place and to remove the old one, and I'll show you what that jack looks like. But this job is primarily all about the fact that this weighs 400 pounds and that you have to get it into place with great precision and hopefully not injure yourself. And so to help in that, we went out and bought 2 bolts that match the thread pitch of the bolts that hold the differential onto the housing. We cut the heads off and then threaded them into the housing, and these became like guide pins or locating dowels, so that as we slid the differential onto place, it would just drop in there really nice and easy, so that you can keep your fingers clear of everything and you have a nice big target for getting this thing centered. It's really, really challenging, maybe even impossible to do that without those, because you'll be sitting there having to hold it in position while attempting to thread a bolt. And you know, that sounds hard, does it not? Well, aside from basic mechanicking tools and a positive winning attitude, that's all you need to do this job. So let's take a look at that transmission jack, and then we better get started. This is our transmission jack. This is from Harbor Freight. I don't think they're terribly expensive. It's been a while since we bought this. We've got a piece of angle iron bolted onto it, And that's just there to give us something to rest the back side of the flange of the differential against, so that we can then ratchet strap this onto here, because we don't want this wiggling around. And once it's strapped to the plate, you can actually fine tune the rotation of the plate with this knob here and this knob here. So you can get it pivoted right into position, and it jacks up right there. These are super handy. You can use them also for installing water tanks, propane tanks. Anytime you need to lift something up under the bus, these transmission jacks are just, they're perfect for it. Really like them. All right, so here we have the new differential. It's actually just a remanufactured differential, but basically new. And you can see that's my axle number. It's an N175, and the ratio is 373. I got this from LKQ. If you want really any type of truck part for your bus, including these, they're a great resource. This was only 975 bucks, which is, I got a great deal. And what we've already done, Robin went and pulled this axle half shaft out off of this side. He's moving really fast. But we checked and just verified that this spline count here matches the spline count in there, and it does. So we are in good shape here. Over on this side, we've got a catch pan already. We're gonna be loosening all of these bolts here and pulling out these half shafts, and that's gonna let hub oil, or that's gonna let axle oil start draining. And under here, that whole housing, all the bolts around it are gonna get pulled out. We're gonna drain all of the fluid down into this big old tub here, disconnect our drive shaft, and then and we get to wrestle this thing around on top of a tranny jack. Pulling out all these bolts around the differential. We got the fluid drained out, and somebody used Loctite. That's exciting. I didn't have a choice.
You could have gone full shade.
I coulda. I wouldn't do that though. Hey, look at who's coming in. Hopefully he fits in the door. Nah, he will. This guy, Alex, has one of the coolest. I gotta do this to catch it all. Yeah, dude. So that just kind of dropped out. We got under there with the jack, and you know, one thing led to another, and now it's empty. And there it is. Just kind of went on us, Robin.
Yeah, that jack was just like a step. It's like the porch.
It's perfect. But now we can just drag it across this plywood and get it out from under here.
I think we can just roll it, yeah.
Here we go. All right. The next operation, there is the yoke on the old differential, which is this. And it is what the drive shaft universal joint connects to. We have to remove that from the old one and install it on the splined output pinion of the new differential. Once we have that swapped, we'll be ready to put that in here. You can see we've got all of our oil drained out, all the gear oil. This is looking really gross. So it's not a surprise that the old guy, this is like really sludgy, just not good. Woo! Our yoke is bolted on, and Robin's working up a custom little kind of mount that we're gonna bolt onto our transmission jack to help us stabilize it. Because these things are a lot. It's hard to like, the scale of it. How do I compare? It's huge. That thing weighs so much that we're gonna, look, I caught Ben and Alex, I got a live studio audience. The new diff, it weighs so much, and it's gonna be so hard to wrestle on there, that what we're gonna do is cut the heads off of these bolts and thread them into the axle housing and use them as guide pins so that we can just hook that diff on there and scoot it in. This is a 9/16 bolt. Never seen one. Ever seen one? No one's ever seen one before. Okay, the diff pumpkin is up. It's fully installed, and Alex and Robin are getting that driveline reattached to the yoke. And while they do that, I am gonna hop in here and I think Alex already cleaned the back of this flange, but clean the other half shaft for the axle flange and get that ready, and we'll put some more of this ultra black on there. And you stick it on there, snug up the bolts, let it sit for an hour, and then fully torque them. And then tomorrow we'll be able to top this up with fluid. All right, it's been not quite 24 hours, but enough for the seals here to be cured. And we're gonna start adding in our 7590. And if you don't have one, you know, grab one of these pumps. It's still gonna take forever, but at least it'll be, you know, physically possible. Pull off the plug in there, fill this up, and then I think we're gonna take it for a test drive. Okay, we're outdoors in the bus. We got the new gears in the back, and we're gonna go on a test drive and see how we do. Okay, here we go. Oh yeah, acceleration is fine. Just rolling through the gears here. See how we do. Really feels good. This new diff is much quieter than the old one, which is good. I was hoping for that. Oh, those new gears are so much quieter. It made such a big difference on how quiet it is in the bus now. We're definitely going fast. Everything feels really good though. Well, we hit 73 miles an hour, which is really as fast as I care to go, and there was still more to go if I wanted it. So that's great. Really good, really good. We're gonna go back to the shop, call it a day. This is awesome. Initial thoughts, so far I'm stoked, it's great. We swapped the gears, they're quiet. It's given me significantly more top speed. I'll really get to feel full advantage of that when the day comes that I swap my transmission out for one with a locking torque converter, because even though now my cruising RPMs are lower in fourth gear, you know, on the highway, because this transmission has a slipping torque converter, it's still going to allow those RPMs to go up. So my cruising RPMs have not dropped significantly, but my top speed has gone up a lot, if that makes any sense. one day when I put in that Allison MT643 in this, it will really change everything. And that's gonna be a great day. But until then, this ain't bad at all. I needed to do it anyway, and I got a great deal on that diff, so kinda had to do it, you know? Well, I would consider that test drive a great success. I got as high as 75 miles an hour, and frankly, that's as high as I need to go on this bus. And it sets me up for perfectly cruising at 65 miles an hour with my engine RPMs right where I want them. Hopefully that will give me better fuel economy, and it's already made a difference on the noise inside the cab. Swapping out those rear gears made a huge difference in how this bus performs, and now it really is a highway machine instead of a city cruiser. My name's Chuck Cassady. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you found this informative. If you want to improve the highway performance of your bus, I highly recommend considering a rear gear swap. As you saw, it's not that complicated, it's just pretty heavy. Thanks for tuning in. We'll check you next week.